Alors, je vais appeler maintenant à la tribune.
Now, I'm going to call on stage Frank ROUBANOVITCH. He'll be alone with me, but we're used to talk together, Frank and I. And we have in line Valérie FAUDON. I know she's connected because she's been asking me when she was going to deliver her presentation. And Paul Spence, I don't know if you're here. You're from London. Paul, are you connected? Are you with us? So 3 major players. Good afternoon, Valérie. You're an old friend also. And with this fan, you did a very interesting and important study on funding modes for nuclear industry. Thank you very much. So they worked on the preparation of this conference, and also Frank on stage is Valérie is the representative of the industry producers, the nuclear field, and Frank is representing the consumers. So he expects from the producers to produce a lot, not too expensive, and especially asking the state and the regulators to give him some fixed and stable prices, not fixed, but at least stable prices on the market. And Paul Spence, I don't know if he is with us. Yes, there he is. Good afternoon, Paul. Thank you for being with us. Every year, EDF Energy is always with us, so we work a lot with the UK, and we hope that this will go on because we need you. We are allies on the market. And Paul is the Director of Strategy and Corporate Affairs at EDF Energy in the UK. And of course, he followed all the funding of Hinkley Point, and I think that now he's looking at Caesarwell funding. It's not exactly the same model, as he will tell us probably, so I will not say anything about this. Paul, you will tell us more about this. So I will start with Valérie. You may have to leave us afterwards. Well, I would like you to stay for the debate, but I'm not sure that there will be much debate because the others are knocking on my door. So Valérie, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Claude was kind enough to ask me to talk about the study we've just produced in the framework of the public debate on the construction of 6 EPR program. So this is key for these units. So there will be a public debate that will start on the 27th of October, and it will go on for 4 months. And it's critical because we cannot do any creation request and authorization request without the public debate to be over. And we hope that this debate will be positive. And then there's a second element that will be also key. That's the funding scheme, the financial engineering, because the production cost of electricity, and I think that it's the same for Hinkley Point. Paul will probably mention it. This depends highly on the cost of capital, which is very sensitive. And for now, and we will see in the studies that were done by RTE, that all the production modes have been had the same update rate of 4%, and we are in a scenario where we have to renew some of our nuclear fleet with 14 units. So the whole cost of such a system is 10 billion euros cheaper than a 100% renewable scenario. But this difference shows the benefit of renewing one part of the nuclear fleet in France, even if the capital cost is very high. So this issue of the financial engineering is very important. So for our study, first, we wondered what was complicated to finance. Why is a nuclear project is complicated to fund or to finance? 3 main reasons to this. The first one, well, it's very capitalistic or capital demanding, and so when you have a structure with high overhead cost, in order to do some remuneration and get some return on initial investment, you must have some visibility on the revenues. And you know that the energy markets currently in Europe don't give any long visibility on electricity prices, and we also need to have some guarantee on the availability rate, which is a bit complicated in nuclear industry because there's in a system where there's a lot of renewables, and So that's the first thing, the capitalist nature of this, which is quite similar to renewables. Second point is the size of the project. For the French project is 52 billion euros. This is an audit that was done by the director of 15 billion euros. When you look at the size of the balance sheets in France, even EDF cannot get this money from their proper funds or their balance sheet. So it's complicated. The size of the amount of money that has to be collected makes this a unique project. And the third characteristic of a nuclear project is the duration, because you invest for 60, 80 years. So this is not an investment window that is common to any other project. And especially, you don't get any revenues for 10 to 15 years, so you have a negative cash flow for about 15 years, no remuneration. So it's complicated to fund a nuclear project. So for the second part of the study, we studied about 10 cases, how the historical fleet had been financed. There was a loan. We looked at what was done in Finland. The customers there became the shareholders of TVO, and they invested in the TVO power station, and then they got electricity at the production cost. And then I guess Paul will talk about HPC, so I will not reveal the scheme here, but we also looked at Hungary and the Czech Republic, which are very interesting models, because, in Hungary, there is interstate loan between Russia and Hungary, and so they have been their financial engineering accepted by the DG Comp, and so the company managing this project is separated from the existing fleet. And of course, we looked at Suez, which have submitted their project to the European Commission. It's being under review. And here there is a state loan covering, I think, 100% of the construction, and then an electricity price which is guaranteed. So this was part of our reflection. So we deducted 3 recommendations for the French state. The first one is to think over the long term, and that's the issue is political risk here. And there is some progress right now because the nuclear is popular within the French population since 2018. And there's a larger number of French people who think that we'll need nuclear energy in the future. And even if some political parties are still against the nuclear program, we can see that their followers are less and less of their opinion. And so we hope that we'll have this national consensus that we've had basically between the left wing and the right wing in the 70s and 80s, because François Mitterrand lined up 43 nuclear reactors. So that's the first recommendation. The second one is some regulation. So I think that this has been on the table. I think you talked about this today. This is a complex issue, but it's obvious that nuclear cannot be built without regression, without having visibility on the revenues and the sales price. And there is some regulation on risk sharing, construction risk. And finally, third point, involvement of the state, participation of the state one way or another, maybe to have some own some capital. So this is the result of the case studies that we've done. So the French state is working on the scheme, and like I said, this is the critical path now, because the target is a 4% funding rate for these projects. Thank you very much, Valérie, and you're right on time. This was perfect. This was clear. But I invite you to go and have a look at this study. Yes, please read this study. Yes, you will not get bored by it. It's quite interesting. It's very interesting for those who are interested in the financing of nuclear energy, but I think that everybody's interested in that. Now, I'm going to call on Franck, because he does need electricity, and he's going to tell us under which conditions, because now we are in a serious crisis. Some companies sometimes can't afford the electricity bill, and I think that he does share with me the idea that a price shield is the right solution, right option to come out of this crisis. But you will tell for yourself. A year ago, I was in this conference. A year ago, the crisis had started for energy consumers. And where I'm sitting, there was a representative of the European Commission who said that we had to wait, that the crisis will not linger, and that it was not the time to question the market model. And this is something we still hear now. Some days ago, a French SME contacted me because when they were paying electricity 50 euros per megawatt per hour last year, now this year it's going to be 1,300 euros per megawatt hour. So the price is the consumption multiplied by a unit price. Since the unit price is too high, so the solution is to have a zero consumption, and that's what they will do this winter. So we expect in many industries, and not just the ones you see in the press, you are going to stop temporarily the production chain. We think that the inflation would be between 10 to 15% just because of energy increase. Many SMEs in France can't find energy providers because they are also facing grave difficulties, so there's no solution. And many companies simply having no products in Europe will buy their products abroad. And of course, you might think of fertilizers, but there are many other things, so that's the allocation. And some economists are telling us, yes, but you know, there is the price signal will push you to consume less. That's what the liberals are saying. So you need to understand that there are two price signals. There is the long-term price signal. If you see that electricity is increasing less than oil and gas, that would push us for more electricity. And if the price is fivefold within a few months, but maybe it will go down a bit. So the impact of this price signal is to stop in integrating the European industry. Is that the signal we want? I'm not sure. So I invite economists to think about this seriously. So in face of this urgency, I'm shocked by the slow pace of the European decisions. The war has been going on for 6 months. There was a summit on the 9th of September, on the 30th of September, the 7th of October, the 20th of October, and we know nothing will come out of it because there were leaks already. One of the efficient measures, the short-term measure, is to do what Spain and Portugal did, that is to subsidize the price of natural gas just for electricity production, because it has a leverage effect. So France was pushing for it. We know that it will fail. Bruno Le Maire said that this morning, because the Dutch and the Germans are against it. So in this panic, every country is setting up some shields, not in the Europe of 27, but Germany will have a price shield to protect 70% of industry consumption. The Poles did the same. The Portuguese did the system that I explained. France will probably do nothing. We'll see. But everything is going bonkers. Europe has imagined some assistance for companies so efficient that France had a provision of 3.5 billion euros, and 500 million have been used. I will not tell you all the criteria you have to meet, but the thing is, we don't want subsidies. We want a market that works well. We want a market with a long-term signal. And once a year, I was going to the Commission, to the DG Comp, to explain that. Now I no longer go there. I'm desperate because I know I will come out of there crying, because they are supposed to do this for the well-being of consumers, and they do the opposite. So it's dramatic for us. So I'm wondering now about the benefit of centralizing at the European level this whole policy of market organization when we see that in Canada, each province, Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, and so on, have their own market mechanism, which is linked to the energy mix of the province, and that doesn't prevent anti-solidarity in terms of interconnections. So maybe we should add some subsidiarity to this. I know that Claude disagrees with that, but a few words about what we expect from the market reform. I was a bit frustrated when Christophe Grudler mentioned this, but didn't have enough time to go into details. But I think that we need some funding of nuclear energy, but not just that, the whole electricity production to cover the existing fleet and the new fleet. So there are three major models. There is a long-term contract, everything that the Commission doesn't want, that would allow large energy-intensive, over 30, 40 years, to have a visibility of what they would pay for. They can also contribute to the funding of the nuclear, but that would not cover all the consumers far cry from that. There's a second model. That's the contract for difference. That's what France wanted to set up in 2020. And the European Commission opposed that, so that was a failure. And it accepted it for the UK, which is no longer a member state. So they accepted it, but under conditions that are, for example, they accepted. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. So the contract for difference is when the market is high. EDF would pay back some money to the state, he would transfer it to consumers, and vice versa when the price is low, and that would allow everyone to have some guarantees. And finally, the third model, which I think is the most interesting, is the central buyer system, which is in place in Ontario. So there is an entity planning the short, mid, and long-term needs, how many megawatts they need. They do call for bids, or they sign contracts with electricity producers over 40 years or shorter time for other projects. And this way, the spot market can always work. So if the short term is efficient and everybody agrees, if they keep on existing, the consumers have a stable price over the long run. And this way, they can invest in reindustrialization, and they can invest in the transition for more electricity and less fossil fuels. And in conclusion, I would like to remind you that from energy depends the stability of our societies. So entrusting this to the market is just absurd. Thank you very much, Franck. I'm not sure I have understood the single buyer model, but maybe we'll come back to this. It's not your fault. It's just, maybe it's my fault. You know, I know that you had sent me an article by Dominique Finot that I didn't have the time to read. If he's listening to me, he's a partner of the Revue Transition Énergie. He wrote a long article, but I was busy with the organization of the Entretien, and unfortunately, I read many things, but not this one. Maybe I was wrong. Now I'm going to give the floor to Paul Spence. He is going to explain to us how they finance their plant, their nuclear power plant, and how we could maybe make it a template. You're no longer an EU member state, but we would have wished you to stay, you know, but it's okay. We can still work together, right? So, Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be able to join, despite not being a member of the European Commission, Claude, but like you, I wish we still were. But I'm very sorry not to be there in person, but I've been able to listen to what's already a very interesting discussion. And it was very good to see Luc refer to David Mackay, Professor David Mackay, and his book. David was the chief scientist for our Department for Energy, and is the foundation, or created the foundation for the modelling that when the British government set the ambition to achieve net zero before 2050, it was David's work as I say, that was the foundation to identifying that to get there in the most cost-effective way would require something of the order of 70 gigawatts of solar generation, 50 gigawatts of offshore wind, 30 gigawatts of onshore wind, and about 24, 25 gigawatts of nuclear capacity to be part of the low carbon energy system, where that electricity system is going to be producing and required to produce about twice as much electricity as the UK consumes today, and about 4 times as much low carbon electricity as is on the system today. So there is a massive need for the UK to have investment into low carbon infrastructure. And as Valérie said, the nature of that low carbon infrastructure is that it requires a lot of upfront capital, and therefore as low as you can make that cost of capital, it helps achieve a low price for consumers. And so the first thing that the government did a few years ago was put in place one of the arrangements that Frank talked about, so the contract for difference mechanism, where the builders of low carbon projects have the confidence that they will achieve a price per megawatt hour for the electricity that they're producing, and they will be paid when they produce that electricity and for taking the risk of constructing the project in the first place. And they're paid essentially in 2 components. One component is a price from the market for the power that they produce. And then there will either be a top up if the market price is below the agreed strike price, or a payback if the market price is above that strike price. And today, that mechanism has been very, very successful for encouraging investment into low carbon UK assets. Today, we have about 8 gigawatts of low carbon capacity, wind, biomass, solar, producing and operating on the UK system today, and with the very high power prices that we experience at the moment, paying back to consumers. As well as the 8 gigawatts that is already producing, there are 30 gigawatts of further capacity which are already contracted and are in construction. And that includes, as Claude and Valérie said, that includes our Hinkley Point C project. The strike price for the Hinkley Point C project, contract for difference, very famously was £92.50. At the time, that was 25% below the equivalent cost for the average wind projects that were being agreed. It was twice the wholesale market price at that point. But if Hinkley Point C was producing today, so if we had started construction earlier and if we had completed the construction, today that project would be paying back £4.5 billion a year to consumers because the wholesale price has risen so much. So at the time, there was criticism that £92.50 was a very high price to pay for the capacity. With the benefit of hindsight, it looks to have been a very good deal for UK consumers. However, as we think about further new nuclear projects, the government has been looking at whether or not there are ways that it can reduce still further the cost of capital for nuclear by doing 2 things. The first thing is by widening the pool of available financing and the available funders. And the second thing is by maybe taking some of the risk during the construction phase themselves. And this is the regulated asset base structure that has been put into legislation as the basis for, we hope, the next new nuclear projects that will happen in the UK. We hope the first of those projects will be an engineering copy of the Hinkley Point C project to be done at Sizewell in Suffolk. And that project, with a regulated asset base, will have consumers or the taxpayer paying some money to the developers during the construction phase and taking some of the construction risk. This isn't a particularly novel structure. I asked my team to give me some numbers, and they tell me that there are already £100 billion worth of electricity assets on the UK energy system that have used a regulated asset base. They are predominantly transmission and distribution assets, but they have been financed at a much lower cost than the Hinkley Point C project. There is also precedent in our water sector of a construction project being financed in this way, and again achieving a lower cost of capital, which will then reduce the cost of the power that's being produced. Just the final thing I was going to say, and Frank was talking about some of the actions that he hopes France and Europe will put into place. With the energy crisis and with the Putin invasion of the Ukraine, the British government has been looking at whether there are ways that it can protect consumers from the high prices that are being seen in the gas markets and break the link between those high prices and the price that is paid for low carbon renewable assets. And they are looking at the moment whether via legislation they can extend something like the contract for difference mechanism that's being used for some of the new projects to apply to existing renewables and nuclear assets in future. All of the things that the British government are doing, of course, require something that Christophe referred to earlier, which is that they require investors to see that there is an attractive return, but also that this meets the criteria of a low carbon project as defined in the European taxonomy, and we hope and we expect also in the UK equivalent of that European investment taxonomy. With that, I will stop.
Un grand merci, Paul. Alors,
Many thanks, Paul. I'm terribly sorry. I know how frustrating this is going to be, but unfortunately, we're running so much behind schedule that we won't be able to take any question, except if it's a matter of life or death. Well, we had a whole colloquium dedicated to this particular topic. We had a British economist who spoke. He was the one who, did a lot of extensive work on RAB, on the regulated asset base. Valérie didn't say, but there are now 4 models under discussion within EDF. These are the 4 models that they examine and they review in order to opt for the best model. There have been leaks, it was supposed to be highly confidential, but no final decision has yet been taken. And you heard Poland, they do not yet know who they're going to go for. And the Polish representative didn't go as far as saying that they would opt for the Americans. But he mentioned the U.S. On the top of his list, followed by France and South Korea. We're very far away from funding. That's what we're talking about together with Eve during lunch. Those projects are projects that we have been talking about ever since 2013. Well, this is a question that I wanted to ask to EDF. We've got You've got the EPRs in France, you've got those in the Netherlands, and then you've got Poland and India. Will we have the capacity of rising to the plate? I don't know. But anyway, we might have time later to ask the question. But we will certainly make sure that there is an article on what you were referring to being published in the Lettres of les Entretiens. It's really a very serious matter, you know. How come the European Union and the member states cannot help the European industry and the European companies survive? This is really unimaginable. And we're not only here talking about production, we should also talk about jobs. You know, we need to make sure that we give proper consideration to those companies. And since the employees do want to be involved in the management of the companies, it makes things even more difficult. The problem is that we have very little knowledge of them. There are thousands and thousands of companies, you know, not on the radar. Yes, Henri, is there something that you wanted to say? With a microphone, please, because otherwise, if you don't use a microphone, you won't be translated.
Greenpeace, les Verts.
The Greens, they have developed an undermining strategy. They've worked real wonders, you know. They are everywhere. They impose their ideas, and should the state deviate from what they're supposed to do, they really rap on their fingers. This is a war machine. Yes, but you know, there are also economical concerns. Greenpeace in Finland supports nuclear power. They issued a statement about it. This is much more complex, you know. It goes well beyond the pressure exerted by the Greens. No, it is, I think, much more complicated than this. This is only but my own personal opinion, but this is certainly in relation to the topic that we were talking about.